IP out of their research and wanting to do something with it, and our job is to try and help them along that journey. So we've made 15 investments since January, and part of what we do is go from pre-seed through Series A. So our goal is to try and help Singapore find a way to do cool things together with places like Israel.
So before I give my introduction, can I know how many Israeli startups are here? Well, at least we got one. No? So that's not bad. Okay, so my name is Avnish, and I'm the managing director for Accenture Ventures and Open Innovation based in Bangalore. I am also leading a delegation to Israel this time from NASSCOM. If any of you have heard of NASSCOM, it's the biggest software agency or organization from India. They produce very big services companies like TCS and Wipro and Infosys. Some of these names you would have heard. But my focus and NASSCOM Product Council's focus is on product innovation. And that's why our affiliation to Israel, because we feel that the best product innovation insights we can get from here. One of the jobs which I do is to provide Israeli startups access to the India market. And we have been working on that for some time, and will, as we go ahead, like to share our experiences of what works and what doesn't work. We make strategic investments as well in the startups. We have done a couple of them in Israel and 17 globally. And if required, we also do acquisitions. So that in nutshell is the scope of Accenture Ventures. And as I said, NASSCOM is very interested to make India a real startup nation at some point of time. And we are trying to learn from Israel on the innovation front. Thank you.
Can we start asking from the Israeli side? I was actually I'm actually here for we brought a delegation to Israel, and I was asked by many Israeli startups that they want to enter like Japanese market, but what are they expecting to Japanese now Asian markets? Yeah.
Okay. So Cathay has been helping European and American companies for more than 10 years to go into China. I mean, less into the Japanese market, but I mean, China is definitely one of the largest markets today for several reasons, and we can talk about them. And actually, all these companies, they see the potential, but at the end of the day, it's not only about speaking the language, which is already a barrier, but okay, you can always find some Chinese speakers, but it's about knowing the culture and all the good things that everybody in theory, everybody knows. But at the end of the day, the real thing is to bring some value to China. So the Chinese are seen as, in the past, like really it was more a country which was perceived as a copycat and doing everything. There was no innovation. So today, huge talents, especially in, I would say, two sectors, I would say, that are completely being disrupted. I mean, one is automotive, the second one is retail, e-commerce. And if you want to compete, I mean, it's very difficult because they have deep technology. Before, it was just doing something, I mean, copying, and that's it. And before also, Alibaba is, I mean, a marketing, e-commerce platform. But today, if we look again into these two sectors, the technology that you can see there is quite relevant, quite good. So how do you address that? So what you can bring to do to China? So today, it's more about looking into the right partner. So the model that Cathay is quite successful at is really establishing a joint venture with a Chinese player, because that will give you, entry doors into the market and being perceived as a Chinese, which is quite important. So you cannot be perceived as a foreigner. We want to take advantage of the potential of the huge market. So this is one of the things. And secondly, of course, is about the financing. So you have to be very careful about when you go to China, because it's so huge, about having, I would say, a solid backup in terms of investment. Can be a local investor, a Chinese VC, private equity, has tremendous, has grown tremendously over the past 2 years. So I think this will be two of the things that we are seeing. And over the last 10 years, we have, I think, 30 companies out of our portfolio which are non-Chinese, and 20 of them have penetrated into China. And actually, we have already 10 exits of companies being acquired by Chinese, which is also something important to have in mind, which is the exit, because there I mean, potentially you can have a higher success of exiting than in Europe. Israeli companies are typically looking into the US for exits, but on that part of the world, there's also a huge potential to exit.
What is the question?
What was the question? No, why is Israeli companies are interested in entering?
Perfect. So the question is why Israeli companies are looking to partner with China or otherwise in Asia. So I'll be brief. First, it's capital, right? Certain sectors in Israel are undercapitalized. There's not enough funds for certain sectors. On the other hand, many sectors are actually overcapitalized now. There are too many funds, strategic and otherwise, competing for the same deals. So if you look at the area of biotech, for example, ad tech, which is now not favored by the funds, other areas look for funding that is not available here in Israel by the traditional Israeli or foreign VCs. So capital is number one. For China specifically, as Jackie had indicated, we have an issue. The issue is foreign control restrictions in China. We have the Congress coming up in October, I think 18. Hopefully, some of these restrictions will be loosened. We don't know yet. No one knows. Perhaps you know, I don't know. But other than capital, right, the other aspect is partnership, as Jackie had indicated, you know, entering a market which we do not have here. And you see certain very active players from Singtel to Arbor Ventures from Hong Kong doing fintech, and others that are actually looking here to bring in technologies back to China. Most importantly, I would say, again, are in the pharma and biotech, advertising technology, advanced next generation hardware, virtual reality, etc. So these are, I think, the trends that we identify currently.
Can you just give an insight about like the Chinese startup scene and how it's been changing? Because we have this notion that China is really difficult to, Chinese market is really difficult to enter, but is it like changing? And if so, what drives the change?
Okay, yeah, good. So I'm also an entrepreneur and a founder, so I can tell this story from different angles. I remember in around about 14 years ago, when I started with the company, my investor suggested me the best model is B2C or C2C. What is the B2C? That means bring to China or copy to China. So in that stage, most of the Chinese company, the business model is bring or similar with the other countries. Especially for the mobile internet period. And a lot of the companies such as Uber and others share company, and they have the very similar company in China now. But the problem that happened is you mentioned copycat. It's a problem. It's a good problem and also a bad problem, especially for the founders, entrepreneurs, and investors. We found that the valuation of the companies goes up and up, and all the businesses are same, but we have lack of the core competitions. Except we all know China have a very huge market, and it have a huge population. Its growth speed of the economy very fast. But if you want leading in the market, you have some expertise. You have some other things. That is the last 3 years. I found most of the Chinese company, they mention technology. They want to bring in some core technology to beat others, especially for we know for the last 2 years, I think the most hottest word in China technology area is AI, artificial intelligence. It's very crazy in China now. How crazy? I can give you an example. For example, in the China stock market, if a company, to say the public, I have owned some AI technology or I have some AI related business, its stock price will be goes very, very fast. For example, some of the big AI public company, big AI related, not AI exactly company, for example, Keda Xunfei and others, its valuation, its PE ratio is nearly about 80 to 200 PE ratio in public company, public market. That is so crazy. That's a crazy. Evolved a lot of the investor to come and to buy the technology, to invest on the technologies. It's a bubble here, I know, but it's also a good chance China company go abroad to see what happened in the world, to bring in some new technology with their innovation on the business model, combine two innovation, technology and business innovation together to make something happen. That is what happened in China now. So that you can see more and more China face came in a lot of the AI conference globally. And for example, for the in the January of this year, I attend AI company, AI conference, global conference. Previously, the conference set in the similar date with the Spring Festival, China Festival, and because of most the attenders came from China, the organizer have changed the dates to avoid the same date. So that is a crazy thing happened in China. So that is also compare your original question is expectation in Israel. This is my third day to came to Israel. Mm-hmm. Before that, I think Israel will be very, very deep and high tech here, especially for the AI. For example, for the whole day agenda for the DLD. But I think that AI is less crazy than in China now. If you attend a conference, TMT conference in China, I think at least one half speaker or talk about the big data, infrastructure, talk about the next generation computing and other things. Yeah, that is I'm curious about it. I may need your answers from here. Thank you.
Okay, while the other guys were speaking, I was trying to think about how to build on a couple of these points. I so agree with what Jackie was saying, that if you don't have something which is different or niche or boutique, then you should forget it. And I say that with all due respect because we go through the same thing in Singapore. And Singapore has a lot of historical relationships with China at senior levels. And we always say to companies trying to grow into China, unless you've got something which is super specialist and niche, there's going to be a bunch of people already doing something just like that, and it doesn't do any good to try and pretend like you're going to go and expand into Shanghai and Chengdu. But when I then think about what Bill was saying, I was at an AI and pattern recognition, so computer vision pattern recognition event a couple of weeks ago in Honolulu. So here on a Sunday morning, 9 a.m. in Honolulu, where you'd imagine a lot of people thought, well, let me just go ahead and spend a little time outside. There was 4,000 chairs in the event, of which 4,000 were filled at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, of which easily 75% were PRC. So I say that, again, with respect, because the leading researchers, the leading people speaking about the next stage of CVPR were coming from China. And it's a hugely important thing to be able to note. So Amazon, Facebook, Uber, Apple, they were all at the event and they all had a booth. And so were Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, and they were at the event, and there was at least as much energy or more around their booths as there were. Now, if you went back 2 or 3 years, it would not have been like that. So I respect, having lived in Asia a long time, I respect and fear, again, with the correct use, fear China, because I think it is a juggernaut of research and money and hunger. And the third part cannot be underestimated. There's a hunger and an enthusiasm and an energy that makes it a very formidable engine. And so to me, it's a matter of work with, not try and win over China. I think it's a partnering, it's a JV, it's some kind of relationship with China, because I don't think anybody's going to go in and win in China. Take a look at what Uber crashed against the rocks and eventually gave up. So it doesn't mean that there isn't great opportunity in China, but I think you go with, not around.
I'd like to ask Steve, how's this sort of like the position of Singapore? Is it like possible to, like, the Israel companies go to Singapore first to sort of be a gateway to like Chinese market?
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think there's really a gateway. I mean, Hong Kong lost that status a while ago, so I think now there's no need for a front door. I think you go straight to China and you have the right partners. I think it's, like every market, hugely important, because you can always find the wrong partners. It's hard to find the right partners, and I've had a lot of bad experiences through the software and hardware companies that I was running at the time with the wrong partners. So I don't think you need a front door. I think you can always go with. So Singapore government works with China government in a few provinces on smart city and working together on some big initiatives. Through that, there could be a role for an Israeli company because of the specialist knowledge, famously for cyber, famously for things around autonomous vehicle and vision. I think there's always a great role for an Israeli company. I don't think of Singapore as a front door, but maybe as one of the partners in that big mix.
I would add, though, that I actually work with Temasek here in Israel. Yeah, and you know, they were bidding for Netafim, which has not occurred, unfortunately, but they'll do big things, of course. Singapore, surprisingly enough, is actually a gateway not to China anymore. It's not needed, as you're saying, but it is definitely a gateway to the Arab world and to the countries of the Gulf. And you'll be surprised how much work is being done, and it's increasingly on the increase side among Israeli companies and Arab companies in the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and other countries there. And actually, Singapore is the gateway. Often, Singapore would be a front or the connection for those countries that do not want to formally engage with Israeli companies, and that's an interesting opportunity.
Is that so, Steve?
Yeah, no, I think to pick up on that, Singapore seeks to be a friend to all. So Singapore does a lot of work with Indonesia. As the world's largest Islamic country, some other neighboring countries may not feel that they have whatever status to deal with some of those markets. Singapore wants to be a friend to all. It doesn't seek to wedge into something. So importantly, we don't try to put ourselves into something where it doesn't belong, but if we can be useful as a teammate, so whether it's going to the north or going to the south or going to the east or the west, Singapore has historically survived by trying to make sure that it adds value to whoever in a larger ecosystem, because we ourselves don't have much. Very similar to Israel in the sense that Singapore is a rock with no natural water supply, nothing you can dig out of the ground. So we survive based on trying to be a good part of a larger ecosystem. So that's what we're trying to do. And that's why we think that we can be potentially a friendly neighbor to many countries.
So, Avnish, sorry, it took time. Can you give us insight on like the Indian market? What's the difficulty to enter, and what's the opportunity?
So I think before I start on what the Israeli startups are looking from an India perspective, one thing is that we share a very deep relationship and bond, Israel and in India. Israel got, I think, independence in 1948. India got it in 1947. Israel, like India, is surrounded by not so friendly neighbors, right? So that's something which we share, and many other, little less serious issues as well, including all the people who do their compulsory army training in Israel probably find India as the best destination, and we were having that discussion earlier as well. So obviously there's a lot happening from the cultural side of things, and our Prime Minister Modi was here recently, and I heard it was quite a big smashing success. And I can tell you that because when I was coming to DLD, my taxi driver told me that he did not miss even one word of what Modi said. And he said that he was really, really proud of the Indian Prime Minister and what he's trying to do. So I think there's a lot which is similar, friendly countries. There are also a lot of concerns which Israel and India share. One of them is about water, right? Scarcity of water. Both Israel and India have that, and India is trying to learn from Israel in terms of how they have created water right out of a desert. In terms of energy cost optimization as well, there are issues around corruption and terrorism also, as we talked about. So quite a few things which we share together. Now, in terms of why Israeli startups might be interested in India, to be honest, there are not too many Israeli startups at the moment. We would like to change that, and that's one of the objectives of this delegation, the NASSCOM delegation, which I am leading. But you see the population of Israel, right, about 9 million, if I'm not wrong. India is 1.2 billion. So huge market for the Israeli startups, if you can crack it. So, and I'll come to that in a minute. So that's the number one thing in terms of market access. Israeli startups are very interested in India. Secondly is about development, right? A lot of development in Israeli startups at the moment happen in East Europe, right? I think Sofia, Kyiv. But now Israeli startups have started looking at India because there's a big technology talent which is available there, as most of you are aware of. So those are probably the two most compelling reasons of why Israeli startups are interested in India. Now, in terms of what has been the success rate till now, so if you look at I call it the 3T triangle, which is talent, technology, and temperament. So technology is what Israelis bring to the table. Talent is what India brings to the table. The biggest problem is the temperament between the two countries. And that is what has prevented the real growth of how the two startup nations work together. And I'll give you a few examples on that. The first one is that there is a significant amount of cultural issues which are there. And being a strategist, I always say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And in this case, it eats for lunch and dinner as well. So both nations speak English, but their English is different, right? So it's very difficult to get a yes from an Israeli and a no from an Indian. So that's the truth, right? If you look at pricing, Israelis would give a pricing and they would expect that that's the final price, right? Indians would always think that it has been jacked up by 30-40%, so they need to negotiate. And Israelis don't understand why time is being wasted to negotiate on the pricing when that is the final pricing. If you look at the relationship level, Indians want to be in a relationship first, then do business. Israelis want to do the business first and then think about whether they need to have the relationship or not, right? So, these are very interesting issues which are there between the two countries, and till they are sorted out, we may not see a lot of traction happening, or at least the size which the two nations give to each other. On the other hand, there is also what we call the awareness deficit. We did a survey recently in Israel and India, and we found that very few startups are aware of the opportunities in each other's ecosystem. And I'll tell you the reason for that. There is hardly, I think at the moment, there is not even one Israeli incubator or startup or accelerator in India, not even one. Very few VCs, if any, invest in Indian startups, right? So until these structural issues are sorted out, we will not be able to get the kind of success which we are hoping to do. But in my recent visit, I was pleasantly surprised that we went to Our Crowd, and Our Crowd, which is a combination of a VC and a crowdsourcing platform. They are very, very interested to come to India. So is The Floor, which is the biggest fintech accelerator based in Tel Aviv. It is co-founded by an ex-Accenture employee. So they are already thinking about many partnerships which they would like to come and get The Floor there. And similarly, we looked into a mobility startup in Tel Aviv, a startup accelerator in Tel Aviv University. They are doing the thing as well. So I'm sure that with all these developments, some of the issues which I talked about would be addressed. And we firmly believe that when the Jugaad of India and the Utzpah of Israel comes together, magic will be created.
Okay, that's great. Since I'm from Japan, can I just ask from the Israeli side, do you have any expectations on Japan, on how to sort of make Israeli companies grow?
I definitely have expectations of Japan. I financed all my trips in Asia working in the streets of Japan in what was called then the show buy business. So I think Japan is a great business destination. But all jokes aside, I think that since the Prime Minister visited here and the actually emergence of the Japanese economy, putting aside the North Korea issue, right? I think Japan is doing miracles these days, and we see huge activity increase with Japan. I would say in the last 7-8 months, I think many big things are happening. Some of the big Japanese banks and investment banks are now involved here. There are action in the cybersecurity space. We have a darknet company that is now cooperating with Toyota and other big players. Other than cybersecurity, there's a lot of fintech activity. There was just recently the acquisition, the huge pharmaceutical acquisition. So I think things look very good with Japan. I think that the pace of transaction is shortened. So we see Japanese willing to take more risk and act more quickly than before with less, let's say, evolved technologies. So I'm extremely optimistic about the activity with Japan.
Actually, it's a very good question and very relevant because of the timing. Last week, we just closed a deal in a European company with Rakuten. So it will be announced at the end of the month. Yes, and actually, it's in the mobility space, and they've been very active because they've invested in Careem, they're an investor in Lyft, they're an investor in this company, and what they told us is that Europe, including Israel, is very important for them in two aspects: mobility, which we covered already, and fintech. Especially because Rakuten is now launching services in the fintech space. And now they are opening a new branch, without disclosing any information about what they're doing, but they're opening a branch in London to cover Europe. And I believe that they will be more and more active in this part of the world.
So you investors, Samsung, right?
Yeah.
So can you describe a bit
Yeah.
about
One of my investors is a SoftBank, Masasoi-san. And also, but I'm not sure know Japanese economy very well. Yeah, but only for the investor relationship. But from my perspective, I think the one thing that we should learn from Japan is how to build up the product, how to make fine the business, and I'm also very interested about the technology in Japan because there is a very good about the university and also research. But we know a lot of Japanese companies want to enter into China, not only for the culture, but also the Japanese company in China will also face a lot of problems. For example, is how to although China and Japan is East Asia countries, but their culture is also very different. And for example, we know one very popular game in Japan is called Zelda or another Zelda, have been imported by our partners, but it's also failed. Why failed? Because in China, most of the gaming companies, they have very good relationship or they have very strong ability to distribute their contents to different channels. But a lot of the foreign companies, they have only one version. So you have to, although China is a large population, but China we can separate into 7-tier market. If you come to China, to Beijing or Shanghai, it's not real China. It's the same with if you come to Tel Aviv, it's not the real, it's real, I guess. Yeah. So you have to face the 3rd or 4th tier the market in China. That is a major one, not the Beijing, Shanghai. But how we say how to ground, how to get touch the ground. That is the core business. That is why I remember Steve had mentioned you have to find the local partner. The local partner is so important. So this is the same in China. Not only to find people who can speak Chinese, who can get a good relationship with the China government, that's not the most important thing. I think the most important thing is the one who have already operation business, especially know the older market, not only stay in the Beijing, Shanghai, the mega cities. That is the important thing. For example, for the Uber, I think although Uber has been closed the China business, but they have very successful in China. Uber China is very successful. The Didi have to acquire the Uber China. That is very successful things. Why Uber is so successful in China? Because they using the very domestic China person there. I know the China GM of Uber. It's also starting in the business school. It's also previously joined the PNG and also starting in Tencent for several years, working in Tencent for several years. That is smart people. Yeah, that is we should find.
I have a request. If you know the Uber GM in China,
Yeah,
since the acquisition of Didi,
yeah,
you can no longer put your address
yeah.
in English. You have to write it in Chinese
Yeah.
to get the car. It's,
Yeah.
for me, it's no problem. I'm a fluent Chinese
Yeah.
speaker.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's really difficult. It changed the life of expats in China. I don't know why they've done it, but it's actually very frustrating. So seriously, if you know him, you should mention it. But to pick up on the Japanese side, first,
Yeah.
SoftBank
Yeah,
are becoming extremely active worldwide,
Okay.
including here in Israel. And
Okay.
it's not formal, but they are very active.
Yeah.
And Yahoo Japan is extremely active, and also Denso are becoming very, very active now.
Denso, yeah.
And awkwardly enough, sometimes they will invest or acquire here in Israel companies to get to China, to the Chinese market, which is unthinkable. Why would a Japanese company need an Israeli company to get to Japan? But somehow it's happening. So it's very interesting that link for China, Israel, Japan.
Yeah. By the way, I also have a question to Kai. Yeah, I'm not sure about the Japan economy, but I'm curious about SoftBank is a very it's kind of instead of the others Japanese company, or it's only a very special one, or it's a very common company. It's so aggressive and
Yeah.
so do a lot of the. It's much more like U.S. or Israel. I think Microsoft is not like Chinese always stay in there behind the Great Wall, not often go outside. But Microsoft is a very aggressive one. He acquired the ARM, yeah, recently, yeah. It's a huge bet. Yeah,
Yeah, I
on
think
that.
he's kind of like special in a way, and we Japanese even don't get what he's up to. So it's kind of like astonishing to see that he's investing so dynamically for this 1 year or 2 year. So I think he's a rare case in Japan.
Same as Mikitani-san, right? From
What?
Same as Mikitani from Rakuten.
Rakuten,
There's a
yeah.
couple of trailblazers that are
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to really push the boundary.
Yeah, actually, there's only like Mikitani-san and
We mentioned
Song-san
two of them,
is
yeah.
about all we have, but
But I think
But
for his-
how do you see his move? I mean, Song-san investing in many areas and is.
I think he have a very good vision. Yeah, he is a very visionary guy. He believe the vision, and also he can let others people to think about his vision and believe in that. But the problem is that he have the good thing is that he have enough money to bet on that, because he can get support from Middle Eastern investors. Yeah, this is the magical. Yeah, he's a very active player here.
And actually, Song-san's brother is based in Singapore, right?
Taizo.
Taizo-san. Are you aware of him? I
Yeah, he sits in our space.
Oh, really? So what is up to in Singapore?
Better for Taizo to represent himself, but he wants to do things in an environment, thinks it's important for his children to do things in an environment that they can also have new experiences. So he'll be speaking, I'm moderating a panel next week with Taizo on this, because he's trying to do new things. And his investing philosophy, just as an interest for any of the Israeli entrepreneurs, he'll say on stage that if you come to him with a business plan, then he already loses interest. He's one of these, because he's a billionaire, he can afford to be thinking about these things very interesting ways. But he likes to think about what is the ambition that could make a difference to the future of humanity. And he says if you can boil that down to a P&L, then it's not ambitious enough, right? So that's sort of his, I want to back people that want to go places that it's not clear what the business outcome will be, because if it's clear what the business outcome will be, you should go speak to an investor or a VC. If you want someone to back you to do something that no one else can imagine, talk to me. That's his whole mistletoe philosophy. Taizo, T-A-I-Z-O, Taizo Son, S-O-N, Taizo Son. But I think the important point here is thinking about the long term, which is why I'm going to bring it back to China for a moment. For me, there's a really interesting 50 or 100 year long game that's being played in terms of China owning Africa in the sense of investing and supporting so many different initiatives. So for me, China's playing a big optionality game, and that's what I look at when I take a look at SoftBank. It's optionality. Invest in a lot of things, see what works out. There's a lot of excitement. It's not that different from being a highly diversified portfolio, but China plays it at a global level. I think there's some corporate leaders in Japan that play it from this sort of ambitious investing level. Not a lot different than Temasek tries to do. Temasek's in an LP position for a lot of funds for optionality. And frankly, that's what we do as a team in Singapore, is we put money into every deep tech startup that goes through a particular stage with us, simply because we don't know which teams might go on to be amazing, and even if they aren't in that life form, they might be in another. So we're big believers in optionality, and because our LP is Singapore government, we can choose to be a little bit more patient capital. But back to the point about those two big corporates, Rakuten and SoftBank, for me, they're just very intelligent options players, as is, I think, the whole of China government. For those that haven't read it, 13th five-year plan for China government and some of the ambitions and some of the things around IP, really impressive.
Okay, so I guess we only have like 3 minutes. Is it okay if we just, if there are any, take questions from the audience? If there's anything you guys want to ask? Okay, I'll just bring the mic.
So, my name is Elad. My question is that the culture gap is huge between China, anywhere in Asia, and the other part of the world. And we're talking about how to bring Israeli companies into those markets. And the question is, because of the culture gaps, it's so big, do you think that the opportunities that are there are so big as well that maybe Israeli companies can consider those markets as the next first market before even outside like Israel as Europe and the United States? Because as you can see, even in those markets, in India and China, most of the companies are looking inside as well. So it's like basically it's a closed market. Can Israel basically consider those markets as the first market or only later on?
I'll try and be really quick on this one. I think to pick up on the earlier point, Singapore is the most westernized of the Asian markets. So I think to pick up on the earlier point, Singapore and Israel already have defense agreements, lots of manufacturing cross agreements, so that's a fairly easy bridge, easy walk, and that could represent, in my humble opinion, if you're looking for a near-term return in terms of an entrepreneur or an investor, always go west, because I think there's huge opportunity in Myanmar, huge opportunity in India, huge opportunity in Indonesia, but those are going to take some years to navigate for all the reasons we've just covered.
Yeah, I'll just like to add that, again, from an India perspective, there are cultural issues, but there are many success stories as well. right? So many cybersecurity companies are doing fantastic business in India, and I think there the main reason is that the product or the platform which these companies or the expertise which these companies are bringing is not there at all in India. So in such a case, the cultural differences don't really matter because the technology is basically coming from here. The other point is that many Israeli startups have now, or the companies have now cracked the code of how do you do business in India. As we discussed, they started off by selling to Europe and US. Those were their first markets. So to get the same product to India and sell it to a mass market is probably not advisable, which is what was happening earlier. So now the product is being customized to look after the price value fit what Indians want. The Indians want everything, so they want 70 to 80% of the quality at 30% of the price, right? So if you are able to get that equation done, then you are there, right? Also, in terms of using partners, we were discussing that earlier. If you use Indian partners to help you navigate the political and economic landscape in India, that would surely help. And having Indian management after some time to work on these collaborations and also looking into how they want to address the issues, it's very important. Contracting is a big issue which is being addressed because once a contract is signed between Israelis and Indians, Israelis think that it's a line on a hard rock, cannot be changed. Indians think it can be changed based on the situation, right? So based on the situation. So I think these are the things, but we are seeing a significant uptake of the Israeli startups in India, and that's why the delegation is here as well. So anybody, if there is an Israeli startup who wants to look into India seriously, there are a lot of avenues open now. So do shoot me an email. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to just finalize on your question, and as I said earlier, so transportation, it's huge for several reasons. I mean, first of all, China is the largest internet market in the world. Secondly, urbanization. I mean, people moving from the country to the cities. So in China, you have something around 800 million people living in the cities. Thirdly, millennials and consumptions. So everyone is eager to consume, to test, to try new things with a mobile device. So when we talked about mobility, and when we talked about autonomous vehicles, when we talked about smart cities and so forth, the government is really encouraging those initiatives, investing directly in infrastructure, but also investing in the ecosystem. What is the ecosystem? I mean the funds. So there is a market. There is, I would say, a new usage of consumptions from these 300 million millennials that you can have in China, and there is the ecosystem. So definitely, maybe to go back on that point, so you have to look into what is the market potential, so not as a whole, but in terms of verticals. So maybe if you are a tech company, China will not be relevant for you. But if you are in that, as I said before, well, I won't repeat it again, but in the transportation, in the insurance, financial, etc. So definitely you should address that as a first market.
Okay. Okay. Another question. Okay.
Yeah, so very quickly, Singapore is a small country relatively, but where we're speaking with China and India, it's huge. So would you go on a more local government level? How would you advise Israeli startup to kind of understand who would be your partner first? Do you need a local to help you? Would you go for a sponsorship, meaning government to government solution, if it's local government that did some kind of agreements with Israeli government, etc., etc.?
So I think that's a very good point. In India, for example, the central government makes the startup policy, but all the state governments have their own policies as well. And that's where we are actually seeing a lot of collaboration with the Israeli startups. A lot of central governments have started up incubators and accelerators, which are actively looking for startups from Israel, and that is already happening. The other is that recently, with the Prime Minister's visit, a $40 million investment fund has been kept aside, 20 million from each country. and that's going to be used by startups from each of the countries to do joint product development and co-creation. That's very interesting. And the third is that an innovation corridor is being established between India and Israel. And this will result in about 8 deep tech COEs, the centers of excellence, which will be built in India. That will be another launch pad for the Israeli startups to come there and do product development. But you are absolutely right. I think the state governments need to be dealt differently. There is no one single blanket policy in India, but things are becoming much more easier. And just to also say that we have released a report, NASSCOM Accenture has released a report in terms of what is the magic way of collaborating between Israel and India, especially on the innovation and startups. So if any of you is interested, please drop me an email and I'll be happy to send you a short copy of that.
So I would just add that I think the most important thing is to have a champion in the organization that is willing to work with you. It's more important than what the organization is, that you have the champion in it. I think that's the most critical thing. If you have someone that is advancing your goal, helping you bridge the gap and make things happen without being racist, God forbid. Usually for Israelis, if it's a ex-Israeli, an American Jew, or any other person that has some affiliation with you, that knows your culture and can bridge it back, that's extremely, extremely helpful. On the comment and question before, I just want to add one thing, which is where I saw many problems. Israelis don't often look at the subtext. They think only text, content. It's not just directness. They just think if the business case works, fine, we have a deal. In Asia, my impression at least is that the subtext, the context, how much time you spend, what is there, where you sit in the table, is extremely, extremely important. And it's not that it's meaningless. It's actually sending a lot of subtext messages that are helping to advance what you're trying to achieve. And in Asia, I think you just have to pay attention to that.
Okay, so obviously we're running out of time. So thank you so much for interesting discussion, and thank you all.